Good morning, and welcome back to another Fiction Friday on Gaming with ADHD. Today, I am branching out a little bit to talk about a book that I recently finished that is technically not game related, although there are some links. It was released in March of 2022 and is Servants of War by Larry Correia and Steve Diamond. It tells the story of Ilarion Glaskov and is the first book in the Age of Raven series. So, how is this book connected to gaming? Well, first off, to me, gaming is about stories. A game may require that you place a token in a location to get another token that allows you to score a point. But that doesn't inspire anyone. But a game about a candy maker buying ingredients to make candy to sell them and to see who can make the most money selling candy draws a player in and gets them invested in the game. And to be frank, it's been a long time since a story has grabbed me and kept me hooked until I finished it. Second, both of the authors are gamers themselves and have written fiction for the War Machine and Hordes universes from Privateer Press. In addition, it was recently announced that we would be getting a Monster Hunter International miniatures game based on Larry's Monster Hunter novels and produced by Everything Epic, who published the Big Trouble in Little China and Rambo board games. Now, finally, over the last year, I have been following these two authors on their Writer Dojo podcast, and they have been mentioning this book frequently, and so I figured I would give it a try. I have some plans of my own, which I do want to talk about one day on the channel, but for now, I'm going to be supporting people that I follow. So, what is Servants of War about? It is set during a war between the nations of Almacia and Kolakavia, and Ilarion Glaskov had hoped to live a peaceful life far from the capital of Kolakavia, figuring that he was too far away and too forgotten about to be conscripted into the army in a war that had been raging for more than 100 years. In the first chapter of the book, the people of his village are slaughtered by creatures that follow one of three goddesses of this world, and he is given a choice: die from his wounds, or fulfill his responsibility and join the army to fulfill a pact between another goddess and the Tsar of Kolokavia. And that's where we start the story. And honestly, it's where I got hooked. They start us off with a sympathetic character looking to live a simple life he had always known. And instead of that, he had, the quote-unquote fate thrust upon him. Honestly, I loved how they did it. It was very similar to the opening of Monster Hunter International, where it started with an action scene almost right away. I do think Servants of War actually improves on it because they actually give us a little bit more about the character of Ilarion. He has a best friend, he has a mother, a fiance. He manages to survive, the slaughter of the members of his village, but just barely. There's a big fight scene right at the beginning of the book. He then tries to go and get help and passes out on the road as he's leaving town. Now, I don't want to spoil the meeting with the goddess, as to me it was a fun surprise, but I absolutely loved the way that it was done. The setting of the scene, the interaction between Ilarion and the goddess, and the choice given to Ilarion. Now, this happens right after he sees his entire village, killed off. And I'll admit, I may have missed something in the book, but this scene, it seems almost like a one-off that doesn't necessarily seem relevant in the end. There are some things that happen, things that are done to the character, but I'm not entirely sure how they applied. But even if it was just used to push Ilarion into the next phase of the story, I didn't mind. It was a fun read and I enjoyed it. Now, like I said, I probably missed something, or it's going to come up in a later book. But regardless, it was a lot of fun. Now, as you continue reading, that's where you actually start to notice some of the additional links to similarities in the War Machine universe. And honestly, it's not surprising. During the podcast, Larry and Steve mention many times, in fact, that they had originally come up with this idea as a story proposal for Privateer Press. But as it was never picked up, they decided to, quote, file off the serial numbers, unquote, and make it their own instead. The biggest similarity, of course, are what they call the objects. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the name. It seems almost too generic, but it does lend them a little bit more mystery than calling them suits. The objects are essentially giant powered armor infused with a fragment of magic from a golem. And if you are familiar with War Machine, the objects are reminiscent of the Khador Man of War suits. Due to the way that the golem magic works in this story, as the object is attacked, it actually generates heat, but also protects the object from damage. The heat, however, is contained in a steel suit that slowly bakes the driver. Now, I'm calling them drivers because I forget the exact name given in the book, but it'll work for this case. Now, because of the heat, each object is actually operated with a team to provide rest, cool off the suit when the drivers swap positions, and they work in concert to clear obstacles from the path of the object as it advances. The objects are organized into a military unit known as the Wall. Due to his size, the military recruiters in Kobetsnia, they send Ilarion to see if he can qualify to be a member of the Wall. And obviously, I wouldn't be talking about it if he didn't join the Wall, and we end up following him through his training and onto the battlefield. Now, this should be enough to give you a taste of the story, but what did I like about it? So first off, some things that I liked. Number one is the setting. The story is a blend of real-world mythology, magic, and World War I. The soldiers in the war are either in the Wall and, kind of the elites, sort of like the early fighter pilots, or they are in the trenches, and the book makes it very plain that nobody wants to go to the trenches. The trenches are full of the conscripts. They have poor leadership, and just in general, live pretty miserable lives. Now, as for the rest of the world, it also pulls in some of our own world including different cultures, but it is obviously a separate world. It is not our world. It doesn't take place on Earth, even though you may think so. But the authors did a great job of mixing these attributes together to make it a fascinating world, even if we haven't seen very much of it yet. Now, next is the three main characters. Okay, there are plenty of others that show up, obviously very minor, but in total, there are three main characters in the book. The primary is Ilarion Glaskov, and he's our story protagonist. Basically, at the beginning of the story, he wants nothing but to work in the mill back home, but he is marked by one of the goddesses, and he's sent to war. He grows significantly throughout the book, but it's always reasonable and understood. And the authors don't really hand-wave the growth either. He has everything taken from him, but as the story progresses, we see him get conscripted. We find out that he doesn't know how to read, but we see him learn how. We learn why he reads. We also find out that he can barely see. He has really poor eyesight, and we see how that changes as well. He is not a perfect character, but he is a sympathetic protagonist. I wanted to root for him, and I didn't feel like he was going to let me down and just turn out to be a horrible person, but still the center of the story who just happens to do the right thing. I think those types of characters are lacking these days, just that sympathetic, hero. Not that he's perfect, but that he's trying to be a good guy. And I really enjoyed seeing that. The second character is Natalia Baston, the sniper. Now, there are parts of her background that I want to leave as a surprise. She's a very interesting character choice from a minority group, which is where I'm going to leave that. I think the authors did very well by her and her background, and frankly, it made for a very compelling character. She's given complicated and even conflicting motivations at times, and while not as good a person as Alarian, you still sympathize with her situation and the choices she's being forced to make, even if they wouldn't be your choices. She's a very solid character, and I very much enjoyed her scenes. The third main character is Christoph Valls, or the Inquisitor, as I will call him. He's not really an Inquisitor, but if you read the book, again, I don't want to spoil some of the situations, the organizations, but I can't even necessarily say for certain that he's a bad guy. He's definitely not a good guy, and he has done many horrible things. But I don't know if they're all for bad reasons. He is absolutely a complicated character, and he keeps you curious as to what he's going to do next. So, those characters alone help drive this story. I absolutely love the way that they wrote them, and literally, I'm excited for the next book just to see what happens to them. Now, the next thing that I liked was the objects. The way the objects were presented is fantastic. There are advantages to them, their size and their power, and the fact that they are near invulnerable to all attacks. But there are costs to using this power. They are reasonable and they are relevant. There are effects that happen to the drivers themselves that become badges of honor, and it's a very unique way of handling these types of characters. And it, again, I'm not going to say it's the newest or most unique thing, but I like the way they did it and the way that they presented it. Overall, I haven't seen it before, but I really, really did enjoy what they did with it. Another thing I really liked was the pacing. This book gets going and then it almost doesn't let up. Now, don't get me wrong, there are fast and slow sections. There are action scenes and scenes in a tavern. But I was drawn into the story and I managed to finish it in a very short order. I started it as I was driving to Las Vegas, basically got the audiobook and turned it on. And I was absolutely, transfixed on the story as I drove. And by the time we got back to the Phoenix area, I had finished most of the book. A lot of times that's where I'll get distracted by everything at home. But even then, I still wanted to get back to the audiobook and get it finished. It was that good. It kept me going. Because it's an audiobook, another thing I want to point out that I liked, I did really enjoy the performance. In this case, the narrator was Daniel Thomas May, and I have a large collection of audiobooks, but I don't have anything from him. I did check. But overall, I really enjoyed his performance. He did voices for all of the characters, and which didn't turn me off at all. Sometimes it doesn't quite sit right. A deep male voice trying to do a high-pitched female voice doesn't always come off very well, and so I usually don't like it. But he did it very well, and I really enjoyed the performance. Another thing that I would point out, I typically listen to audiobooks at a faster speed, usually 1.2 or 1.3. And the voice still sounded natural, still sounded good. So it was why did my brain just stop? It was a great performance and a good audio quality. So I did enjoy that. Now, one thing that I did like the goddesses. Again, I don't want to spoil some things, because to me, seeing how they integrated them into the story, I really did enjoy that. But there are two absolutely fantastic scenes where they appear in the book. I already talked about one at the very beginning. There's also one towards the end. I would have liked a little bit more development in how they relate to the world, but I have a feeling we will get more of that in future books. Now, one thing that I'm calling it a neutral. Usually in my reviews, I'll have likes, neutrals, and dislikes. And I might get some grief on this one, but one thing that is almost a dislike was Amos. Now, it's not to say I actually disliked the character. He was very interesting, very curious, a lot of mystery behind this character, but he's only used in a couple of scenes, and that's what I didn't like. One of the scenes is absolutely important to the story, and it's implied that the character is very important, but we don't find out much about him in this book. So I'm not sure, how exactly he's supposed to play in the story, what his purpose is. But I'd like to know more of that. That would have been nice to have in this book, but whether it's cutting for space or time, I'm not sure. But I'm looking forward to see what they do with Amos, because I don't think they used him enough in this one. Now, I have tried, but I can't think of anything that I actively dislike about this book. Larry Correia and Steve Diamond do a fantastic job introducing us to this world of both magic and familiarity. They bring in minority characters that are complex, that are imperfect, and honestly, all of the characters are done this way. So, in conclusion, I heartily recommend this book. There's so much to build on for a series, or at least a trilogy. I do not know what their plans are. But this is a fantastic story on its own. It has characters that you want to root for, and elements of the setting that can feel both familiar and new at the same time. They keep you engaged. They keep you entertained throughout the entire book. And since this is gaming with ADHD, I will admit that there is not a game for this yet, but I would love to see it. I think the setting would be fantastic for a role-playing game at minimum, and depending on how the world develops, there's a lot of potential for other options as well. Servants of War, it is available at all the usual places. I do not have any affiliate links for any of them, but you can find them wherever fine books are sold. But regardless, like I said, I enjoyed it, and I hope you will as well. Now, that does bring us to the end of my first full book review, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and comment down below, as I would love to know if you want more content like this, and also how I could improve on it. Also, please do subscribe to the channel. I try to put out at least a few videos about different tabletop gaming subjects each week, and I'd love for you to come along. Regardless, I do thank you for your time and the fact that you were watching, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.